It's like this if you ever tried to clean your kitchen sink. You take a sponge and you clean the sink, you know, and then the sink is perfectly clean, and then you look at the sponge and it's dirty. So then you have to wash off the sponge, and then the sink is dirty. And it's kind of an endless game. And this is the life of the perfectionist. So they said, well, maybe we can't be perfect Buddhas, and maybe trying to be a perfectly enlightened person actually cuts us off from our humanness. And they were attracted to this non-monastic Sangha. And so they changed the idea, the core idea of the Buddha's teaching at the time, by emphasizing, instead of the Buddha being a historical person, what about if we imagine that the Buddha is a principle? That all of us have this nature that is Buddha nature, this possibility in all of us to wake up and to be aware of our interconnectedness. What if we all don't just have blood and don't just share air and water, but what if we're also filled with milk? This milk of kindness. And maybe the practice could be about faith in all other beings, that they also share this kindness that shows up when there is a tsunami, that shows up when your parent gets ill, that shows up when you see how you treat yourself on a bad day. And the second thing is they developed this idea called bodhisattva. Sattva, in this context, means a character, and bodhi means awakening. It's active, an awakening character. Somebody who puts off their own enlightenment to serve other beings, so that you cannot wake up in your life without other beings. So instead of having a transcendence model that's vertical, they create one that's horizontal. That it's actually through the quality of our relationships that we can become more awake as human beings. Maybe a bodhisattva is just somebody who is awake to what they love. And maybe in our culture, where so many people are doing work that is not meaningful, where so many people are disconnected from their bodies, where so many people cannot be fully in their lives, this idea of relational practice is crucial. Maybe the fish, maybe the disappearing bee population, maybe forests need us to practice in a relational model so that they receive benefit from our practice, instead of this idea of a me trying to become perfect. There is a obscure sutra called the Vegetable Root Sutra that I really love. And halfway through it, it says, water that is too pure has no fish. Have you ever seen these great acid rain lakes? They're so beautiful. You know, you're in Canada, but you're in the Caribbean, you know. So beautiful, but nothing's alive in them. Water that is too pure has no fish. Therefore, it says, you should always have a measure of grime in your practice. You should always have a measure of grime in your practice. What else fuels your practice? We all need healing. Some of us, we need healing in our knees. Some of us in our sacrum. Some of us in our immune system, our digestive system. All of us in our families, in our communities. Our government needs healing. Our economy really needs healing. It just fell apart, and we're building up the same model again. And so, healing only comes through yoga. It only happens through intimacy. To heal unresolved grief can only happen through being intimate with grief. To heal loneliness can only happen by being fully one with loneliness. To heal anger can only happen by knowing anger selflessly. To really feel the energy of anger without a me or an object. So that we can take care of our sadness and take care of our joy, take care of our projections, and have this human practice that we call the Bodhisattva path. In the Yoga Sutra, which comes about 600 years after the death of the Buddha, when Mahayana practice was already flourishing, moving to Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, and over to China, a sage named Patanjali codifies various practices and states, Atta Yoga Nushasanam. Now is the teaching of yoga. Scholars always translate this as now we're going to study yoga. But it actually is a little more subtle than that. Atta means now. Now is the teaching of yoga. Do you hear the different emphasis? Right now is the teaching. And then he says, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, which means intimacy, yoga, is a cessation of our misidentification with the fluctuations of our imagination. Yoga is not clinging to all of the different. Vritti means a revolution, and chitta, it means different things. I like to think of it as the imagination. Endlessly creative, and so endlessly unsatisfied. So yoga chitta vritti nirodha. So if now is the teaching of yoga, then what is yoga? Yoga arises when we're not clinging to what moves through us. Not clinging doesn't mean separate from. It means not clinging. When anger moves through us, when jealousy moves through us, when greed moves through us, to really feel what moves through us without clinging, without referring it back to a me. And this is the heart of what we're doing in our practice. And then he says, Tada drashtuhu svarupe avastanam. I like this first word, tada. So actually, in 16th century Europe, magicians used to use Sanskrit words to make their performances a little more exotic. And this is one of the words. Tada, this is where it comes from. Tada means therefore. So tada, so if you're not clinging to what's moving through awareness, tada, therefore, drashtuhu svarupa avastana. Therefore, the one who's seeing abides, avastanam, in svarupa. Sva means self, rupa means form. This is the punchline. Okay? If you're not clinging to what's moving through awareness, tada, you can be yourself. Now, I don't know about you, but this is a bit of a letdown. Because, like, it's supposed to be then you get enlightened, right? Which is the word moksha. But actually, the word moksha doesn't appear in the Yoga Sutra. Neither does Brahma. Because I thought, well, then you become God, you know. It's so inflated. You know. But actually, it's then you abide in swarupa, self-form. It is not capital S self. You can't do capitals in Sanskrit. It is just this. You abide in this. Yeah. What a relief, huh? Yeah. In other words, you have not been here. You have not been intimate with this. You've been in your theory about this. You've not been intimate with friends and lovers and children and the natural world. We're mostly in our virtual version of that world. What can you do for me? How can I move? The world is clunky. We're trying to move things around and get things out of our way and get ahead. And selfish happiness is an oxymoron. It's not possible. You can't just pursue a path to get me happy or to get me enlightened. According to Patanjali, if you're not clinging to these theories of I, me, and mine, then you're intimate with this. So maybe non-attachment, not clinging to your views and stories, is actually a practice of engagement. Maybe at this time, where we're so addicted to certain stories, that what we're starting to see on Earth, especially in the Northern Hemisphere, is the beginning of a recognition that the stories we have about the way we live are about to end. And maybe Fukushima and whatever happens there is the beginning of that crack in all of our imaginations, to see that we can't continue living the way we're living ecologically. We need to fix it back. And maybe the only way to begin to fix it back is to recognize that the stories we've been telling can't continue this way, not individually, but also not socially, culturally. Last summer, the wonderful activist Thich Nhat Hanh said the next Buddha will be Sangha. The next Buddha is not going to, descend from some crack somewhere. The next Buddha will be community, social awakening. So this is what I mean by this idea of relational practice. And it begins with you. Socially engaged practice is not just doing social acts. It's also taking care of yourself and this form. The medieval Japanese teacher, poet, philosopher, calligrapher Dogen says, to really study the way is to study yourself. And to study yourself is to forget yourself. We forget that part, I think, sometimes. To study the way, the word way is Tao, which literally means a road, from the Sanskrit root marga. To study the path, in other words, to enter your life, you have to study the self. And to study this self is to forget it, in the healthiest sense. To forget yourself. And then he says to forget yourself is to be touched by 10,000 things.